Welcome to the Thriving Farmer Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Kilpatrick. Our mission is to inspire, educate, and celebrate sustainable farming. We believe that you can build a profitable, sustainable farm that gives you true farm freedom. Join us as we talk to farmers, innovators, educators, and entrepreneurs to glean their top takeaways in business and life.
This episode is sponsored by Grip. Got lots of people, places, and things to track? Grip is the easiest way for farmers to track anything important to their operation. With flexible QR code tracking, keeping digital records is a snap with Grip's operator-first mobile app centralizing alerts, reminders, electronic forms, and team conversations. With simple month-to-month pricing and no long-term commitments, Grip can transform and streamline your operation so that you can focus on what's most important, growing. For a limited time, get 15% off any monthly or yearly subscription at grip.ag/pricing with the code THRIVEN25. That's GRIP.ag/pricing with the code THRIVEN25. Hey, Thriving Farmers, Michael Kilpatrick here with another episode of the Thriving Farmer Podcast. And today my guest is Tim Eng, a West Point graduate, Army veteran, and real estate expert who transitioned from the competitive California Bay Area market to homesteading in Tennessee. With his military background and experience building resilient communities, Tim now helps others secure their land, homes, and livelihoods through smart homestead security and preparedness. Tim, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Michael. So happy to be here.
Absolutely. So why don't you give us a little bit of an overview? Give us a scenario of, why you might want to start thinking about homestead security.
Well, that is the next step. I've had so many people reach out to me. They're so excited about getting into homesteading. And as Joel calls it, there is that homestead tsunami. Mm-hmm. And with the rising, we've got tariffs that were just passed today and the given changes with the U.S. economy. A lot of people, it doesn't matter what side of the aisle you're on, care about growing your own food and not having to pay so much in the grocery stores. So in addition to helping people find the right land or the right property to homestead on, I want to make sure that they also focus in on homestead security. Now, it doesn't have to be the zombie apocalypse and, just defending your ground, holding your ground. Uh-huh. Yes, there are some basic skills, rifle marksmanship that you need to know, but there are some, what I consider to be common sense things, but they may not be common sense to people who weren't in the military or who do not look at land every day like I do. And so I want to be able to educate my clients as well as, any of your listeners as to what to look for. Uh-huh. When they're looking for a property. And it begins with looking at the property. But if you already homestead right now, there are ways that you can improve or enhance your security. And security, I'm going to get into it right now. Security doesn't have to be all about guns. And guns are at the bare bones, just like how they say about Marines. Every Marine's a rifleman. I was Army, but I have great respect for all branches. But in security, it's not just about firearms. And I'd like to talk a little bit about that. I have an article that's going to be coming out in Homestead Living, and I'm also going to be speaking about this very subject at the Modern Homesteading Conference. And I also have a Homesteaders United Jamboree Conference that I put on with Mike Fitfarmer at the end of the year in August. So with homestead security, I go off of the SAFE system. I created an acronym, SAFE. S meaning situational awareness, A for access control, F to fortify your homestead, and E for emergency preparedness. And each one of those, there are a lot of different things that could be implied tasks that fall in under there. And I also like to combine the use of modern technology into it so that we can make great use of it and embrace technology and be able to use that on the homestead. I know that sounds counterintuitive. When you talk about homesteading, most people think about Little House on the Prairie, getting back to basics and everything, and that is all fine and dandy. That's something that my wife, Sophie, always talks about, going back to your roots and cooking, nourishing foods and going back to traditions. That there's a time and place for that. And also for homesteading and security-wise, it's great to embrace technology and utilize that. So I'll just give a quick overview of that. Situational awareness involves so many things. First off, it involves knowing your community. And that's something that Sophie and I often talk about, is that as homesteaders, many of us are introverts. I'll admit I'm an introvert myself.
Yeah.
And to break out of our shell and to introduce ourselves and say hi to others in the community, that can be a very difficult thing. I know for me, that was the most difficult thing. Fortunately, Sophie is a lot more friendlier and more outgoing.
Yeah.
Exactly. I don't know where she where she scored on the personality test wise, but she'll have conversations with those that work in the local co-op or at the local coffee shop. And that's something where you have to go and just say hi to people. It doesn't matter what their rank is, what their position is. If they work in town, they're going to know what's going on in the town. And situational awareness involves that. It involves getting involved in social media groups, whether it's a Facebook group, Telegram group, Signal group. I'll add this vignette right here. I have a client who reached out to me yesterday. She was looking in Middle Tennessee, and she said, "You know what, Tim? I cannot find homesteading, homeschooling communities where I'm looking, and I want to go to East Tennessee." And I said, "Well, hold off. Well, where are you looking right now?" She goes, "Well, we're in Columbia and Spring Hill." And I'm like, "Well, you're at the mecca right now of homesteaders and homeschoolers. We have a lot of friends that are out there doing just that." And she goes, "I can't even find raw milk." I'm like, "Oh my gosh, there is so many resources where you're at." But she goes, "Well, I don't know where to find them." I'm like, "Yeah, they're not just going to be, hey, advertising, come over here if you want to join our co-op." You have to actually do your research. You have to get involved, ask the right questions within the community, get involved and join these social media groups. So that's just one example of situational awareness. And then it kind of brings it back to knowing your neighbors, actually caring about your neighbors, because that is your first line of defense. Back where I'm from in California, we had something called Neighborhood Watch, and they had these little signs that are posted. Did you have that?
Yes, I've seen that. Yes.
It's kind of a joke, because it's like those who are thinking about robbing the neighborhood, they're going to get scared because you have a sign up like, "Hey, we're watching." You know what? I find that most neighbors are pretty nosy. They already naturally nosy, want to know what's going on with everyone's business. But if you do something nice, get out, bake some cookies, get to know your neighbors, it goes a long way, especially in the South here, and just having a conversation. I'm going to share a really quick story too, because Sophie went out of her way and cooked this nourishing bone broth and wanted to share it during the wintertime. Yeah. And I thought we could just, drop it off and go off and do our other tasks and stuff. And that's something that, we're kind of trying to do, coming from California and just having a lot of things that maybe it's my A-type personality, but kind of got sucked in there and said, "Why don't you stay for a while?" And we ended up talking for 2 hours. And it's like, okay, that is the culture. So wherever you are looking to homestead, you need to, and that's something that I learned in the Army when we went to Iraq. We needed to learn about the culture that we're going into their country. And here, we're in the South. We're going to be here in the South. We need to be able to assimilate in a way, and so that we're not coming off as being rude or impolite from where we're from. So just there's a lot to think about before you homestead. It's not just about, okay, let's put up fencing, let's research to find out what's the best type of cow we want to bring in or chickens. It goes more than that. It's about situational awareness and learning more about the community and the area that you want to move to, which is why I tell all my clients, you need to do a recon. You need to come out, make it a vacation with your family or loved ones. Or recently I had some my clients who are partnering up and they're just really good friends. Make sure you get eyes on the community, eyes on the property. That you may not have the perfect property available at that given time, because that's just when everyone's vacation or leave times line up. But if you actually have boots on the ground and walk it, and you can see it and visualize the area, and you can you have that good vibe with the local community, I don't mind doing a virtual tour after that. And then you can visualize, and you're not just shooting in the dark, because the last thing I want my clients to do is to buy anything sight unseen. And the reason being is everybody wants unrestricted counties. That's the biggest craze.
Correct.
It's like, I want to build whatever I want. I don't want the government breathing down my neck. Well, with that and without HOA, you're also going to have people that may have less than desirable homesteads that they have with, junk
Yes.
cars out there. They may not be dangerous, but just visually it's displeasing. And that's something that you may want to see when you're driving to your new home. And that's something that I'll also look out for my clients. So that's situational awareness.
Yeah, and so that's a couple things you thought right there. Is it's not just realizing that the neighbor over the hill may be X or X, certain type of thing. It's also making sure that in, let's say, a scenario that you can get access to the food you need, with the raw milk or the So again, I wouldn't recommend you advertise to all your neighbors, hey, yes, I've got 600 pounds of flour and 4 beeves in my basement, but being able to have that connection for raw milk, or a neighbor that does have a butcher shop or something, is going to be incredibly key if something was to happen.
Right, and you can find raw milk if you belong to like the Weston A. Price. There are chapter leaders throughout the country, but it's kind of funny what you just talked about, Michael. I see a wide range of homesteaders. You have the homesteaders that are, hey, I want to grow as much food as possible for my loved ones, and I just want to freely give or sell at the farmer's market. Then I have other homesteaders on the other end that are, quote unquote preppers. I'm gonna grow my food. I'm gonna be hiding it, and I want to be in the best possible place where I cannot be found. Now, regardless of on what side of the spectrum you're on, you're still going to have situational awareness. You're still going to want to follow the safe method to make sure that you are well prepared.
Absolutely. All right, so then your second letter, let's talk about that one.
Okay, access control, and that's something that is a military term, and access control, avenues of approach. When you're thinking about predators, you think about animals, you think about humans, they're going to take the path of least resistance. That's what I mean. So inherently, human beings, we're lazy. We're just going to go and drive or walk where there is a path. The same with animals, too. So everything, when people are thinking, they think too much often, and they just watch too many movies thinking that, and you can go crazy to overanalyze and overthink the situation. So for access control, obviously you get your gates in, and I have a multi-layer approach. I always think of defense in layers, defense in depth. And I also combine that with technology, cameras, whether they're wired cameras to Wi-Fi cameras, and that can be an issue, especially if you're looking for a location like many of my clients and myself, where there is no 5G towers around the area and the cell reception is very spotty. So some of those deer cams that use that kind of technology, you might have to switch them out and go with Wi-Fi and get boosters. And then again, that's another question if you don't want too much Wi-Fi exposure and things like that. And so there are different things to take into consideration, but the world is your oyster. You can make whatever changes you want to adapt. And it does not have to look like a compound. You can make it look nice. You can adopt permaculture practices. You can make use of trees, shrubs to create different layers to, hide your homestead.
Yeah, because I think we've all seen probably, probably the most famous one is The Walking Dead. But we've all seen these, as the society breaks down and they're driving along the road, it's the house next to the road that they go and storm or take over. It's not the little tiny, two track line to the grass.
Right.
So, when you're thinking about that, that the picturesque farmhouse down the little valley that everyone can see.
Yeah.
It looks great, but it doesn't look great if something really happens.
Yeah, after you said that, maybe you should park some hoopty cars and those Dave Ramsey cars up front,
yes,
to deter them.
Yes.
Yep. So it does. There's a lot more that can go into it, and I do cover that for access control. F is to fortify your homestead. Now I'm going to start off with one thing that you may not be thinking about. You may think about door locks and camera system, but I talk about organizing your home. Fortifying your home doesn't mean just, getting the best are getting bulletproof windows, things like that. It also means knowing where your stuff is at and having easy access to whether, you need to get emergency food or you get to your your beans and your bullets, and knowing where everything's at, or even your flashlights, and making sure that they're charged. And so fortifying your homestead, it kind of bleeds into the emergency preparedness, which is the last letter, but having good organization. And that's something that I haven't really seen a really clean homestead, because if you're homesteading and you're truly homesteading, you have a zillion projects going on and they're all half done because you're always putting out the fire. And that also involves inside the homestead. People always talk about the outside, but you can't forget about inside the homestead.
Yes. Today we're taking a few extra minutes to chat with Tracy. He and his friend recently developed an app called Grip that helps track and manage farm assets, records, and teams. Tracy, can you share a little bit about why you created Grip?
Sure, thanks for having me on. So Grip has been years in the making. It started when I began searching for a tool that would allow me to track my equipment maintenance and team communication for the equipment I own and for several farmers I was talking to. I was surprised to find there really isn't anything out there. Like most farms are still trying to rely on paper and spreadsheets to manage all their day-to-day operations and communicating with their teams over group text. Once I started looking into it, I found that some farms are losing thousands of dollars a year due to gaps in their asset and equipment logs and the record keeping being done on their farm.
Well, I think every farmer has lost at least one important piece of paper at some point. Were there any light bulb moments that made you realize you were onto something big?
Yeah, in one case we worked with an onion grower in Colorado. They were a large operation with a fleet of tender trucks but couldn't keep up with maintenance records. To bypass the problem, they went through a maintenance checklist for all their trucks once a year, whether it was needed or not. So every year the maintenance expenses were ridiculously high for those trucks, like thousands of dollars high, because they were just paying for a lot of work that didn't need to be done. We helped them set up Grip, and now they have all their trucks and tractor maintenance records stored right on the app. They're saving thousands of dollars by keeping accurate records and getting maintenance alerts right through Grip.
So they were probably changing fluids and filters that were still perfectly good. For an operation that size, they probably weren't even thinking about how much it was costing them until you came along.
Yeah, it's really the little stuff that gets overlooked, We worked with an apple packer operation who kept paper records for their 5-pound bag scale calibrations. Seems pretty straightforward, but it turns out they were keeping all their calibration records on paper, and no one is going to thumb back through hundreds of paper records to try to figure out what the trend was. Using Grip's electronic forms, they quickly realized their weights are over by as much as 16% at times. For as many apples as they ship, those ounces add up really fast.
Absolutely. So that's the kind of stuff that Grip is designed to solve.
Yeah, exactly. It's the easiest way for farmers to track anything important to their operation. Could be equipment maintenance, calibration records, or 100 other things that tend to get overlooked or pushed to the bottom of the to-do list or forgotten somewhere in your infinite scroll group text.
So what's the best way for our listeners to try out Grip on their farm or operation?
The best way to get started is through our website, gripp.ag. That's Grip with 2 P's. You can select one of our monthly plans and download the app today for a very low-risk way to get started using the code THRIVEN25 for 15% off.
There you go. Head over to grip.ag. That's Grip with 2 P's and check it out. Okay, so then, thinking about this too is you got to obviously know where your bullets are, but also we just experienced a massive weather event over the last 2 days. Massive. It was over like 10 different states, spawned, I don't know how many different tornadoes, but it was a huge event. They said it was the biggest event of weather instability in 4 decades.
Right.
And so massive. But one of the things I was looking at as I kept seeing all these lists of like what to do in a tornado is know where your shoes are. It's the stupid stuff.
Yeah.
But when you think about it, if you're trying to find in the dark, trying to find your shoes, you could be in a world of hurt.
Yeah.
Knowing where that stuff is. Talk a little bit about obviously having power to your homestead. So backing it up maybe with alternative or at least just having a generator.
Yeah, you read my mind. You're just segueing right to the emergency preparedness.
Okay, all right,
and
so the fourth one.
That is the fourth one. Emergency preparedness is building redundancy, and we'll start with power. Most people have power going to their homes, and where I live, it's very reliable, but as to your point, there are a lot of natural disasters, and seems to be suspicious there's a whole lot lately in these areas. So to have a backup generator, a whole house generator, solar, And you know what? Homesteading, it really depends on your budget, right? And there's a wide range, and I can name all these different things, and they'll say, "Great, Tim, but I don't have the budget for all these things. I'd rather put my budget into food and animals, livestock." But if you could think of it ideally, then you have to think about other alternative means to provide not only electricity, but this past winter we had to think about heat. And I got a quote for a whole house generator, but it's very pricey. And to think about heat, you can also think of propane heaters and things of that nature, and actually having it. Think of it beforehand, not when the storm is actually coming. I'll remember, was it like a year ago, we had a huge winter storm come through Tennessee. Couldn't get any bags of salt. And that was something where, because we're not used to it. We're not used to getting so much snow.
Correct. Yes.
And if you store up and stock up on these kinds of things when you don't need it, like coming in the summer now, that's when you can be prepared. But most people don't think about that, and that's something you kind of have to put in the forefront of your mind. In addition to that, water. Water is a huge thing. Whether it's getting water to your house, ideally, and I hear it all the time from clients, they want natural spring water or they want well water. And depending where you're at, well water doesn't guarantee clean drinking water. A lot of it could be contaminated. You may want to have backup systems like a rain catchment system, and you can either do it yourself on the cheap, you can hire to do it, and that can get kind of expensive there. But you may want to just get water out of your creek and be able, or get it to your pond, maybe use a ramjack, use a solar pump and be able to feed, I mean, not to drink out of, but for your animals, for your livestock, and find other ways to filter out your water.
Yeah. Well, on the West Coast, actually, in the Middle Coast, well, actually, even in the Carolinas, there's fire control too.
Absolutely. And we actually did buy one of those, I guess they are water pumps that are gasoline powered. I bought that when we had our first homestead in California because we had so many fires going. Yeah, absolutely.
Good point. All right, so a lot to think about here. So when people buy property, is there like 3 things that you tell them to think about as part of this?
So it really depends on what you're looking for. And when I talked about fortifying your homestead, I've got clients that look for raw land, and I'm looking for property, but the cost of properties are starting to skyrocket now, and there's a lot more competition. Just this week alone, I've had at least 6 clients that are flying in or driving in, and it's just this past 2 weeks. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's beautiful weather right now. It's warming up. Actually, it's like 70-something degrees, 80 inside the house right now. And it just happens to be when everyone's coming in. So properties that have been on the market for almost a year, they're getting snatched up right now.
Gotcha.
And that is a common thing that I'm seeing. I'm starting to see this. So a lot of buyers are getting discouraged and frustrated, and they're saying, you know what, the price range is going outside my budget. I'm going to go and look at raw land. Okay, if you're going to look at raw land, yes, walk the land. Look at the different avenues of approach. Can you see the main road from where you're at? Where are you going to be building your house? Oftentimes I'm thinking of, where is the site going to be, the home site? And yes, it's going to be cheaper by the road because all the utilities is right there and it costs money to bring it back, but then you're not going to have enough setback for security, and you want to be able to build enough time to respond, to react.
So I think I want to stop you right there because that's something new. I think that obviously it's a very military term, and that's why you're always trying to see further out. But people don't realize that is time to react. So obviously you can't be watching all the times. This is where it comes into like cameras or that kind of stuff that kind of give you a visual heads up of what's happening.
That's absolutely right. You cannot have your eyes looking behind your back, even though we tell our children we have eyes behind our head. We see them. But you have to recognize where your vulnerabilities are. You need to look at where your blind spots are. You have to think like the enemy. You have to walk outside your property and look in and see what if anybody was driving by, for instance, what can they see your garden? You're with all your tomatoes and everything, and you've got all the food right there. We relocated to a community where everyone, even those that were 60 plus years old, had their own little garden. You don't want to be the house that everyone goes to when things hit the fan. And you don't want it to have everything exposed as well. So to have that setback, to identify your vulnerabilities, because there is no such thing as a 10 out of 10 perfect homestead, but you can constantly work to improve and enhance the security of your homestead. Now, I'm probably going to get someone asking me, well, Tim, how do I budget? How much of a percentage goes towards infrastructure? And I've had this question, how much goes to infrastructure? How much goes to animals? And it's like, well, I mean, it really depends on your goals. And in terms of security, you don't want to put as much on security because you have other vital things you want to put money towards, but you don't want to forget about security. Security needs to always be at the forefront of your mind. So when you're selecting that property, when you're walking that land, you should already be thinking about that, because the more that you've identified up front, the more that will save you money in the long run.
Well, and I think too, we can think about this can be a multi-step process too. So you don't have to build all these things at start. You can say, hey, this could go here at some point. This can go here at some point. So let's say you want to have water security and you can't afford the $20,000 for a pond, but you identify the location for that pond and make sure you don't put a barn there.
Absolutely. It's great to plan everything out, and a lot of people want to build it out in phases, but what you're going to find out is it's cheaper to actually do a lot of it together, right? To get the plumber out together, to get, certain things completed at the same time. So, and it's not as cheap as what people may think too, if you just buy the land and then put the utilities, but to get the permit for the septic, to actually dig the septic, to bring the power lines out to where you want it to be, that's going to cost quite a bit of money. And if people have not factored that in and they're just working off their savings for livestock and fencing, which a lot of people forget about fencing. And that's why when I do walk the property with other people, I want to take a look at what infrastructure is already there, because fencing that already exists, maybe it may be less than ideal. It's barbed wire, but if it's still good, along with any sheds or outbuildings, all that's savings to my clients, so that they can focus on using their dollars on purchasing utilities or whatever it is that they want to focus on.
Yeah. What lessons can we learn from historical or modern examples of homestead and just different situations of how to be more secure?
I don't have like personal vignettes of people breaking into a homestead or ransacking it, but because of, let's say, Hurricane Helene, and that's something that most people couldn't really prepare for because it was a hurricane that went up into the mountains, something that should not have been done. But I will add that to the people that it did affect in Western North Carolina and Eastern Tennessee, they are some of the grittiest people ever who will know they will not take no for an answer and will roll their sleeves up and get things done. They have the knowledge, the know-how, or are not afraid to help one another to get things done. And so I mention that because it's not just how much money you throw at something to build and have all these contingency plans, but it's also your mindset, and it's also the skill sets that you build, the community that you create. And for many people like myself who I came from the Bay Area, Silicon Valley, but a lot of people are moving from big cities and going into farm life, where this is something that is new, because I always thought that you had to be born into a farming family and be a fifth or sixth generation. But I'm finding a lot of people are wanting to get into this lifestyle. And to do this, it's not about, when you join a community, when you go to these little towns, they don't care what your LinkedIn profile says. It's all about, what can you do? What skill sets do you provide? And it's not bringing a checkbook. Okay, you need to be able to contribute. And so I give that because that is something in addition to, and that's all part of homestead security with situational awareness, is also being aware not only of the vulnerabilities of your homestead, but of yourself, and just actually taking a personal look at yourself. But by adopting these practices, the SAFE method, it will help make your homestead a hard target. When I say a hard target versus soft target, it's almost like when you're, I don't know, for example, if you're going to go to an ATM and pick up money, you don't want to keep your back towards everybody else. You don't want to be flashing your cash. You want to do what I would consider as common sense things. I mean, and if you're, alone walking in the dark, you're going to want to be able to try to get to a well-lit area. Like people already think about these things when they're wheeling and dealing on Facebook Marketplace. You don't have the person come to your house to pick up the items. You meet them at a Target parking lot or someplace that is more populated. And that's because you want to make yourself more of a harder target. And that's the same principle with your homestead, just like what you mentioned, Michael, with like the zombie apocalypse. Like they're going to go with the easy target, the one that they can just go, oh, there's food, it's right there, nobody's protecting it, I'm going to go grab it, versus something that's going to take a little more effort.
Yeah. Well, I think you mentioned something there too, not coming into the situation and not coming into the community and flashing the cash around, because there are definitely those people that do that. And in all honesty, those are probably the first people in some sort of situation that are going to get in trouble, because everyone's like, well, I think they've got a lot of stuff in their basement.
Right.
So I think there's that balance of coming into the community, being a part of it, but also making sure that you're a little bit reserved, I guess, is maybe what I'm going for there.
Yeah, and that kind of went back to what I was talking about when you're getting to know your neighbors and assimilating into the culture. It's the same thing. You're not going to wear, beachwear or whatever clothing. You're not going to wear designer label clothes around these small towns. You're going to be wearing some tattered, farm clothes, because you don't want to stand out and stick out like a sore thumb.
Yeah, I might even go so far to say, no, I'm not the financer from, the Bay Area.
Yeah, I know.
I guess I would, Tim, if I were you, I would lead with the military and not the real estate.
Yeah, exactly. I can find a lot of common ground when you start talking the lingo, and people will bring their guard down and just want to be able to, connect. Yeah, there's that trust.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Tim, anything else before we go? This has been great.
Yeah, it's been great. Thank you, Michael. I do appreciate it when you welcome or invite me onto your show. It's been great. I love your listeners and your viewers. I do have a video course coming out. I already have one on finding the right land, the right property to homestead on, but because of the demand, I am also releasing a homestead security course, and that's something that will be coming out by the end of May. And so hopefully that's when this comes out. And that's something that's a hot topic, as I mentioned, I will be talking about at a couple of homesteading conferences coming up. And I'm also working on a second book with Sophie. So it's Sophie's second book, but my first book with her, and it's going to talk about homesteading. And I'm definitely going to be talking about homestead security.
Cool. And where can they go to find more about all this?
Okay. Well, you can check me out at thehomesteadingagent.com, and I'm also homesteading agent on Instagram as well, which I keep updated. So I would love to hear from you.
Okay, awesome. Well, again, thank you, Tim, so much for coming on today.
All right, thanks, Michael.
So there you have it, another episode in the books. So I'd love if you would hop on over to iTunes and leave us a rating and a review. Those mean everything to us. We love to hear what you're thinking. If you have a podcast guest that you can recommend, please pop on over to the Thriving Farmer Podcast website and leave us a review. That's thrivingfarmerpodcast.com.